What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to talk about my top 5 must-buy sophomore wide receivers coming off of disappointing year ones. You know, the guys like Amari Rodgers, the guys like Terrace Marshall. Psych!
That's the wrong number!
Those players are face planters. As the people that are subscribed to this channel know, I generally fade face planters. Now, I know that intro, like that little sentence there and the title and the thumbnail are a little bit of clickbait, but I kind of just want to show with this video how a lot of the people in this industry, in this space, kind of try and profit off of the idea of buying players low and selling them high. That like Dynasty is a stock market that you can exploit by buying year one wide receivers who struggle, have bad year ones, and explode later on. And they'll cite, you know, Devontae Adams didn't do good year one. Why can't this player kind of explode later on in his career? And we'll put that sort of claim to rest in a little bit here. But generally speaking, the way that I play Dynasty and the way that I kind of see the game is that year one production across all positions is the best indicator we have for future success. No matter what they did in college, how much they produced in college, what their recruiting star was out of high school, when your cleats touch the grass in the NFL with grown men out there, what you can do against the competition you're going to face for the rest of your career is the most meaningful factor for me. Now, I think that going after those wide receivers that go out there and the lights are a little bit too bright for them, going after them and trying to buy low and sell high later on, I think that those are bad bets to ever return meaningful value in Dynasty. So in this video, we're going to talk about what face planting is, why it's important, and then who qualifies in this 2022 class as face planners. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you get on below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Thirsty, thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
All right, so the big term when we talk about wide receivers who disappoint in year one that are bad bets moving forward, we call these players, even quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, but we're just going to talk about wide receivers in this video. We call those players face planners. Now, a face planter doesn't just mean, oh, this player didn't produce well enough, we're going to label him a face planter. The genuine definition of face planter is defined as a player who lost 12 or more picks of startup ADP from May of the year they're drafted to the following May after their rookie season. Now, that's why we're making this video in May. That ADP just dropped for May, so now we finally have that data. Now, the guy who coined the term face planter at DF Bean Counter, he runs the Bulletproof Discord, Patreon, all that good stuff. He has great content on Twitter at DF Bean Counter. I'll always reference him when it comes to face planter stuff because I think that he really opened the eyes of the Dynasty community to this trend. And the idea is that Dynasty players look at these rookies with rose-colored glasses, right? They drafted them on their teams. They have sort of pet players that they loved in the pre-draft process, and they're going to constantly make excuses for anyone who was hurt, they underperformed, the coach wasn't playing them, too much competition. They will make every excuse in the book for their favorite rookie. So the idea is that even if the eternal optimism of the masses aren't enough to stop a player from face planting and dropping a round or more of startup ADP, then he must have really disappointed in year one, and that gives us a signal that that player probably won't be good in the long run. Now, this is a sound idea, right? The idea that a player doesn't produce in year one and he probably isn't going to produce later on in his career. We have the evidence to back this up. Now, it's because of my sick database. All the girls just hit my line when I whip out the Google Sheets.
Daddy, chill.
So let's look at the wide receivers drafted in the top 3 rounds. So we'll just do top 3 rounds just to control for draft capital and account for weird stuff like undrafted free agents and players having weird ADP late in drafts. We'll just filter all that out. We'll filter out draft capital, and we're just going to look at the wide receivers drafted in the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft, and we're going to sort of put them into 2 buckets. One is face planners, so players who lost 12 or more spots of ADP, and the other are non-face planners, players who didn't lose 12 or more spots of ADP. And since 2007, we have had 77 wide receivers that have face planted, and only 10 have ever hit a top 24 season. And it's not a pretty list either, right? So face planners, their ceiling outcomes are looking like Sterling Shepard, DJ Chark, Brandon LaFell, Giant Steve Smith, Will Fuller, who's not bad, but he's like, Will Fuller, Mike Williams, Tyler Boyd, those kind of guys. None of those guys ever ascended to like top 12 Dynasty wide receiver type assets. Guys who faceplant, there really isn't this like moonshot type payout with a lot of them. Now, you can point to Demaryius Thomas, who's on this list. I get that people are going to want to point to Demaryius Thomas. Oh, why can't this guy be Demaryius Thomas? Here's the issue. Demaryius Thomas was held back in his rookie year, despite being like a sick prospect. He was held back in his rookie year by a rookie Tim Tebow, awful quarterback play. I believe that he also tore his ACL as a rookie, so there's a lot of outside stuff going on, and he is literally the only exception. Now, Pittman face planted. I still like the process that he was a bad bet, but he only face planted 14 picks, and that's only like 2 picks past what an official face planter is. And I will be honest, a full round of ADP is kind of an arbitrary threshold, so I should have been a little bit more, maybe a little bit more open to the idea that Pittman could have been good in the long run, because, 14 picks, if it was just 11 picks, I wouldn't have been as pessimistic about Pittman, and that's just kind of a hairy area of a arbitrary threshold. So him falling 14 picks is the lowest fall among all of the guys on this list, so he was actually probably one of the more likely guys to ever sort of dig himself out of that hole. Now, regardless, it's not a pretty list. It's only 10 out of 77 total. Now, when we look at the non-face planners, we have 117 non-face planners. 63 have hit top 24 seasons. Now, that's a huge difference, right? Because 63 of 117 versus 10 of 77 is a massive hit rate difference. One of them is over 50%. The other is 15%. And with these non-face planners, obviously, you have the guys that are blue chippers up top. You have DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson. It's not worth sort of giving you guys that screen grab. Now, the important thing to note here is of the wide receivers in my database, 39.7% of them drafted in the first 3 rounds face planted. Almost 40% of the entire population. So it's not like face planting is rare. It's almost a coin flip that a wide receiver will face plant. And the wild part is that out of all of the top 24 seasons in my database, only 13.7% come from face planters. So face planters account for about 40% of the population, but only 14% of the top 24 seasons. That is not good. And when you put them side by side, the difference is crazy, right? So we have non-face planters hit top 24 seasons 53.8% of the time, while face planters only hit top 24 seasons 13% of the time. That's a 4 times difference. Now, again, I get that we have the blue chippers like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, all of that in there. But we also have other guys that didn't face plant, right? We had Darnell Mooney, Gabriel Davis didn't face plant. I believe Deontay Johnson didn't face plant. So you have those guys that show signal late, like Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown didn't face plant. You have the guys who didn't show a ton that were drafted in later rounds that didn't face plant, and that is massive. So it's even a big indicator for guys that weren't drafted in the top 3 rounds that go later on in drafts, more of those fringe type guys. I'm not really talking about those slam dunk Calvin Johnson, Julio type guys in terms of this data being useful. Now, I also want to get something out of the way. Is we mentioned Chris Godwin, we mentioned Antonio Brown. People love to point to players that they deem as face planters, right? Players that they think are, well, this guy face planted and he turned out fine. Here's the issue. There's a massive difference between not putting up big numbers in year 1 and face planting. Face planting, again, is simply just a definition of losing 12 or more spots of ADP from May of your rookie year to May of that following year. And they point to guys like Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin, Cortland Sutton, Antonio Brown, Eric Decker, Alshon Jeffrey, any wide receiver that you can think of that had a quiet year 1, they'll point to that guy. Here's the biggest issue. These wide receivers that face planted are not the wide receivers with quiet seasons, but the ones with quiet seasons that the masses give up on. I think the masses, the people in ADP, are actually pretty good at deciphering things and seeing oh, this guy showed enough flashes to be good down the line. And despite none of these guys averaging over 10 points per game as rookies, even some of them being 2nd or 3rd round picks who are kind of expected to be in that range to not face plant, none of them face planted. All of them panned out. Besides, I guess Cortland Sutton, but Cortland Sutton I would still stay panned out. The rest of them all have top 24 hits. Again, it's not okay, this guy didn't play well in year 1, I now deem him as a face planter. It is no, there is a firm definition. These guys do not qualify as face planters. So any player that's out there that's oh, well, this guy had a quiet year 1. How come, why can't I expect player X to also have a quiet year 1 and be good? It's because the masses decided that they showed enough flashes, whether that's from efficiency, from a tape standpoint, that they didn't decide that they should have been, given up on and left for dead after year 1. So now we finally get to the juicy part, and it's applying this to 2022 and seeing which rookies from 2021 face planted in their rookie years and what edge can we gain from that information. So I'm going to put this on the screen here. We have the 2021 rookies, wide receiver rookies, sorted by a present day ADP with their gain/loss and startup ADP in that right-hand column. So you have the green ones are the guys who didn't qualify, and the red ones are all the face planters. So our official relevant face planters that are actually getting talked about or were drafted in the top 3 rounds are Nico Collins, Rondale Moore, Josh Palmer, Terrace Marshall, Amari Rodgers, Diami Brown, Anthony Schwartz, Tylan Wallace, Dwayne Eskridge, and Tutu Atwell. Now, this is good info to have, but the issue is a lot of years, I'll sort these guys by ADP. So I have them all sorted by year 2 ADP from a Dyko. And usually you'll see a mix, right? You'll see up top, all of them will have gained ADP, and then you'll get to that 80, 100 range, and you'll start seeing a mix, right? You'll start to see Michael Pittman and Henry Ruggs are next to Darnell Mooney, Gabriel Davis, guys in that area. And you can kind of exploit it that way. The issue here is that because, guys like me on YouTube, and I know Bean Counter on Twitter and his podcast and his Discord, and Akash and everybody have been shouting from the rooftops about face planters, the market has completely corrected. All of the non-face planters are now valued ahead of face planters. So we kind of lost our edge here. There's not a ton to take away here, but I will sort of highlight a couple of these guys who did faceplant and kind of what I'm doing with them moving forward. Now, regardless, even though there's not a massive edge to be had, there's still signal for the face planters in terms of what we should be doing with those guys. I'm fading pretty much every wide receiver below like that Rondale Moore range for just wide running backs in that range. You guys know I want the handcuffs. I want players where the starter goes down, I now have 15 points per game, or I can flip that player for a rookie second. You don't have that same like out to winning that bet with wide receivers. So I'm just not really looking to roster guys like Nico Collins or Terrace Marshall, who I know are on a lot of people's buy low lists. Sadly, I still have shares of both guys from last year's rookie drafts. I'm personally good on that bet. I'm not trying to buy low on either of those guys. I think that you should really be trying to find creative ways to offload your Nico Collins and Terrace Marshall share. So first up, we're going to talk about Nico Collins and Terrace Marshall here as sells in this area. The problem is that they aren't screaming sells because they both are trading for about like early thirds in that area. But I think that these are some good ways to offload either wide receiver. So we use Adeko's trade tool from real leagues, real sleeper leagues with real money. And the first one he has is a trade where a guy swapped Nico Collins out for Kareem Hunt. Now, that is never going to happen. That is a wild trade. I don't know what kind of league that is happening in, but it's the type of trade I would be looking to make, where you can go Nico Collins to any of those upside handcuffs in that range, like a Khalil Herbert, Brian Robinson, Ty Davis-Price, Kenneth Gainwell, Darrell Henderson. I think Ronald Jones is a good one too. Anybody in that range. Now, again, those running backs don't have to be good to pay off, whereas Nico Collins or Terrace Marshall have to be good to earn targets and pay off. The minute any of those running backs starter goes down, you can then slot them in your lineup for 15 points per game, or you can trade them away for like a second. Now, if Brandon Cooks goes down, Nico Collins probably isn't even a top 36 option that week. That's sort of the trade-off there. Then I also like the idea of trying to get some draft capital, like trying to maneuver Terrace Marshall or Nico Collins into sort of finagling yourself into a second. Now, I like the idea of bundling Collins in like an early 3 for a 2023 second here. The idea is that we want to, players that we've already seen, so rookie profiles we've already seen bust or faceplant. At this point, we just want to trade into a random like second, so we can just get a similar profile, right? Nico Collins and Terrace Marshall, both second round picks in rookie drafts. Get a new second round pick, re-roll it, and maybe you end up having, an Amon-Ra St. Brown, T. Higgins, those kind of Brandon Ayuk, guys who were drafted in the second round of rookie drafts. So you just want to re-roll that, pick a similar profile, and then get a player who probably won't faceplant in year one, right? It's about 60% chance, I believe, from what we did on the research earlier, that wide receiver won't faceplant. So the whole idea is you just keep re-rolling that down the line, kicking that can down the road, getting seconds in advance. If you can't get a 2023 second, I don't mind taking Collins in like an early third and getting somebody that's in that, Kadarius Toney type range, where you can kind of go Nico Collins or Terrace Marshall plus a third to get a Kadarius Toney, or to go out there and get like a somewhere in like an early second, maybe like the 202, 203, 204 range. Apparently, you can also do, from the trade tool, you can also do Nico Collins straight up for a 2024 second. Completely fine with that. Also, another strong class down the line. Or you can do Nico Collins straight up for somewhere in like that 209 range, which I'm also fine with. Give me literally any second for Nico Collins or Terrace Marshall. I'll take that all day. Because the idea here is that we're not only re-rolling into a new wide receiver, you can also get that second round pick of draft capital, and that's a coveted asset. Nobody in my leagues wants Nico Collins or Terrace Marshall, so you can offload them for draft capital. You can then you don't even have to use that second round pick on another rookie. You can turn around, let's say you're a contender, you can turn around and trade that second for like a Miles Sanders, right? And nobody's going to give you Miles Sanders for Terrace Marshall plus. It's just not going to happen in your leagues. So if you can just offload that into new draft equity and then use that draft equity to put it elsewhere, that's also another way to kind of maneuver your assets on your team. Just kind of, turn face planners into and use that value from the face planners into either contending assets for your team or just better uses of those assets. Now, I also did a deal earlier today. When I was writing this video, I kind of just had an idea. I was like, okay, let me go into my leagues and kind of see how I can offload Nico Collins or Terrace Marshall. I did a deal where I offloaded Nico Collins and Terrace Marshall for a 2023 second today. Very happy with that. But now I will say I'm also open to kind of waiting to sell these guys, because I think that you have a chance of getting like a preseason hype train, kind of like the Bryan Edwards thing last year, where coming out of camp, they're like, oh, he's the next Randy Moss, he's the next Terrell Owens, just talking that nonsense. but you can then sell them after they might make like a catch in camp, and it's like, oh, Terrace Marshall looks like the best wide receiver out of camp, and they're using him as a tight end, whatever. You're going to get reports like that. Nico Collins, same thing. You can kind of use that momentum in the offseason to sell those players. Now, I think that something important after going over the clear face planters like Terrace Marshall and Nico Collins that have value is obviously we're looking to move off all the other guys like Amari Rodgers and Diami Brown, but they're almost droppable at this point. But with the entire market correcting like this, it might finally be time to lighten up slightly and kind of tolerate some face planters. And for example, we'll talk about Josh Palmer here, Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver. And this is a guy my wide receiver model didn't like. I did not like him coming out, and he technically face planted. The issue is that he wasn't a clear face planter. He was like Michael Pittman, where he was minus 13. Barely qualifies him for face planter status, and he really didn't look that bad last year in his limited time playing. Now, I don't think that he's a buy. I'm not buying Josh Palmer. I'm not drafting him anywhere. I don't have any shares of him. But I think if you have him, if you believe in him, I think he's probably a fine hold. I say this on repeat, where I say when the starting running, I even said it in this video, when the starting running back gets down, you get a running back too that you can either trade away or use in your starting lineup if you have that handcuff. And the issue is why I don't want a wide receiver is because Marquez Callaway last year, Michael Thomas gets hurt. Marquez Callaway is the perceived wide receiver 1. He does nothing for fantasy. Here's the interesting part with Josh Palmer is we had 2 games last year. We had one in week 14 where Keenan Allen missed, and we had Mike Williams missing week 16. Both of those weeks when Josh Palmer was thrusted into that wide receiver 2 chair as a full-time wide receiver, hitting 89.6% snap share, 98.3% snap share. He was a top 24 wide receiver both weeks. When counted upon, he produced. Now, the downside and why I'm not like over my heels to try and buy him, those were 2 very TD-dependent lines of 7 targets, 5 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. The other one, 6 targets, 5 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown. Without a touchdown, he doesn't finish in the top 24, but it's still interesting, right? As a rookie to come in and at least produce in some way. Now, some more negatives, right? We're going to kind of do the hot and cold. We'll talk about, again, he did his thing. He barely face planted. He produced when called upon. The other negative is he looked awful in reception perception. He was a 7th percentile winner against man, 5th percentile success rate against zone. Not good. Now, he didn't even run enough routes for him to have like official like percent of routes and success rate in this chart. So it's not a super strong indicator. It's a really small sample. Matt Harmon was saying that they played him all over the place between, filling in at X when Mike Williams was gone and playing in the slot when Keenan Allen was gone and sort of having this flanker type role. And they sort of used him everywhere. What it seems like now is that he's going to be the 3rd wide receiver in this offense, where he's going to play pretty much flanker next to Keenan Allen slot and Mike Williams X, which is interesting in an offense that's going to be led by Justin Herbert and is going to score a ton of points for, the next 3+ years. So it's a good spot, and he produced where it mattered last year. So given the price of an early 3rd, I think that he's probably a hold if you have him, unless you can find a way to get into a 2nd rounder with him. Again, something like a Nico Collins, Terrace Marshall, a 3rd plus Josh Palmer for a like mid to early 2nd or a 2023 2nd. I would probably do that, but if you want to hold on to him, I really can't knock that. So I lean sell. He's not the type of wide receiver I like to roster when I can just have a handcuff with upside, but I think he's a fine hold if you have him on your roster and you believe in him. And the last guy I want to highlight here is Rondale Moore, who just gives me headaches. He's one of the toughest evals in all of Dynasty because him face planting for me would usually mean that he's a clear fade, but I do think that he is sort of the market overcorrecting a little bit where he's like tiny and the ADOT stuff and everyone's just like, oh, he face planted, whatever. The issue is that he had a fine year for a rookie. He had a 14% target share, 54 catches, 435 yards, and a touchdown with 7.8 points per game. That point per game number is probably around 9 if he scores 4 touchdowns instead of 1. It's really not that's not a bad stat line for a rookie at all. We saw the guys who didn't faceplant in Godwin and Alshon Jeffrey and those guys. All of them had similar target shares and points per game in that area. The other issue I have with him is price in terms of wanting to be a firm sell. The issue is that, again, there is nobody caping up for Rondale Moore. There is nobody out there that's taking him super early. He goes at the 1304 in startup ADP. And this screenshot shows the players that go around him. There's no one on this screenshot that stands out to me as a substantially better bet than Rondale Moore to gain value over the next year, right? I mean, you're looking at Robert Woods, Jacoby Myers, Tyler Boyd, Russell Gage, McCole Hardman. It gets really ugly in that range. He's probably at this point, he is valued probably where he should be valued. Now, in terms of his future outlook and kind of what the numbers are telling me is I took his face planter status, his year 1 PFF grade, point per game, and target share, and found his closest year 2 comps. And this is what the database spit out. We have Tyler Boyd, Michael Pittman, Jalen Reagor, which isn't a terrible list, right? Among these wide receivers, Rondale Moore had the highest PFF grade, the second highest points per game, and he was tied with Jalen Reagor and Michael Pittman in target share. I will say, I don't think it's fair to really give him a comp to Pittman because Pittman just has a different size, play style, a bigger wide receiver. Like Rondale Moore will never ever have a similar like A-dot play style to Michael Pittman. But I think that it's pretty likely that Rondale Moore is either Jalen Reagor or Tyler Boyd. And if he's Tyler Boyd, he'll probably give us like one usable top 24 season and kind of hover around that wide receiver 3 to 5 range, maybe like sort of like a Jamison Crowder. That's kind of what I'm seeing with Rondale Moore now, is somewhere in the range of like Tyler Boyd to Jamison Crowder is kind of how that pays off, which the issue then becomes, that's not a great payoff, right? I'm not in the business of like wanting to like mine Tyler Boyd's in the 13th round. It's not a like difference making type strategy. So my initial instinct was to call him a hold, but I think I lean sell after sort of seeing what his outlook looks like as sort of like his ceiling being a Tyler Boyd type guy. For me, I lean sell, especially after I've sort of seen on the trade tool that I'll put down below in the comments. He's trading for probably a little bit better than his startup ADP right now. I would very easily, these are 4 trades I pulled up from Adaico's trade tool. I would very easily ship off Rondale Moore for a random 2023 second in that first trade. I also love the idea of bundling Rondale Moore in a third for Brandon Cooks on a contender. I think you can also do a similar type deal where I don't know if you'll get it done for like the 311 or if you could do it for like a 4 or something. But if not Brandon Cooks, then I like Michael Thomas, Allen Robinson, Claypool, Tony, Lockett, Thielen. If you can turn Rondale Moore into any of those guys, I would do that all day long. It's also shocked to see Rondale Moore traded for the 202. I didn't know that he was traded for, I didn't know that he was going for that. I would sell Rondale Moore very easily for an early to mid second. Again, I like the idea of just re-rolling a guy like Rondale, who face planted, doesn't have high upside, into an early to mid second and just taking a swing on a different guy with a similar profile. Because that player has the chance to not face plant in year one and have a much higher ceiling moving forward. So I think the lowest I would go, I mean, he's sold for the 202 here. I was looking at the ranks today. I think I would probably take like the Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, Matt Corral types over Rondale Moore. Like the minute those guys get thrusted into starting roles in the season, I think that they would pay off more than Rondale Moore would. So I think the lowest I would go is probably like the 208, right? That's right in that area of like Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, Matt Corral, right in that area. I don't mind it. I think that that's like a little fringy though, but if you can get anything inside of like, you can get anything from like 202 to 205 for Rondale Moore, that's massive. And then this last one, which I think is kind of crazy. I don't know if you'll be able to pull this off, but something like this where you guys know I love those top 5 rookie picks, right? I love Breece, Walker, Burks, London, Wilson. Then there's a massive tier break for me. I like Jameson Williams and Sky Moore a lot too, but if you like, you don't really need those guys at all and you kind of want a bigger difference maker, if you can turn around and put Rondale Moore plus a 107 for a guy like Metcalf, that's an absolute smash. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to get that in most leagues, but I think you could probably do like Rondale in a 107 for probably somewhere like any top 15 dynasty wide receiver I'd be into. So Drake London, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams. If anybody like doesn't want their old wide receivers, I would do that all day long. Same thing with like Deontay Johnson, DJ Moore. I think you could maybe get it done in that area, like in that Drake London, DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill. On like a rebuilding team, they might think like, oh, 107 plus Rondale Moore, 2 like young upside guys, when in reality, not a great bet to make. Now, that's all for today. It kind of sucks that, we shouted from the rooftops so loudly that everybody sort of caught on to the face planter thing, and the market's pretty efficient at this point. So it sucks. There's not a massive edge to be had outside of being like really creative in trade talks like I was earlier today where I did Terrace and Nico Collins for a 2023 second. I know rookie draft season's pretty much over at this point, but if you have any rookie drafts still upcoming or you're on the clock anywhere, I'm telling you, if you're like in the second or third round or like things are happening, when you're on the clock, see if you can kind of maneuver some things. Like if you're on the clock at the 301 and you have like Terrace Marshall, see if you can do Terrace Marshall plus a 301 and come up for like a 2023 second next year. I think that you could I think anytime you're on the clock, and I don't mean just one guy, I would literally, I know this sounds annoying, right? And I do this in a lot of leagues. That's how I did the 2023 for Terrace Marshall and Nico Collins. I literally sent similar deals to almost every person in that league. And you can kind of look at that how you want. But if you just take the 301 plus Terrace Marshall when you're on the clock and you send that out to every single offer of like Terrace and a 301 for a 2023 second, you might get somebody to bite. You might get somebody to send a counter, something in that area. So I think that something that's going to be on my to-do list moving forward in rookie draft season is to get these face planners off of my roster. Easier said than done. Those guys like Amari Rodgers and Diami Brown, those guys are like, I don't think you can trade those guys at this point. Like they're almost droppable. Like Tylan Wallace too. I'm not interested in those guys at all. So I think that pretty much what's on my to-do list is to try and offload as many more face planters in rookie draft season as I can. I believe I have 2 more upcoming, and to get them as many off my roster by week 1 of the NFL season. If we see any preseason hype, I already saw like an Amari Rodgers sort of hype train thing. Any sort of preseason hype, drumbeat, Brian Edwards, Terrell Owens type stuff for, Terrace Marshall, Nico Collins, Rondale Moore, Amari Rodgers, Tylan Wallace, Diami Brown, Dwayne Eskridge, any of those guys, any kind of preseason hype, jump on that. See if you can get like a 2023 third from somebody when you're talking about guys like Amari Rodgers and Diami Brown. But that's going to do it for us today. Just to be clear, I have Terrace Marshall and Nico Collins as screaming sells, while I think that Josh Palmer and Rondale are sells, but if you can't get a price that you like, I don't think that they are bad holds by any means. So with that being said, make sure you go down below, subscribe, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice. Channel, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena for misdemeanors. Dream.